Welcome to the Voice of Nursing. My name is Adrian Tracy from ICG Medical. Today we are very, very lucky to be joined by the Chief Nursing Officer, Jean White of Wales. Professor Jean White, should I add, at CBE. And Jean's joining us to tell us a little bit about her background and also the current state of nursing in Wales. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, we'll hope we can keep it up to the high standards. Jean, it'd be great to understand how you got into nursing at the beginning, and we can go from there.
So I was born and brought up in Wales, and after my A-levels I said to my mother, I don't want to go to university, what I want to do is to work with people. And she suggested all sorts of things I might think about doing, and her best friend was a nurse. And she said, why don't you talk to my friend Pauline and hear what it is to be a nurse? And I was blown away by her stories about what it was like to care for people. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like something I want to spend my life doing. So I started nurse training in Swansea in 1979, so it was a very long time ago. And I completed my training down there. And my job when I first qualified was as a theatre nurse. Which was straight out from training, and I loved the idea of doing something completely for a person at their most vulnerable when they're unconscious, being operated on, and I was fascinated by it. So I did then travel up to London and did my theatre nursing course here in University College Hospital in and around the Bloomsbury district. So I even got to live on Gower Street, opposite the old MI.
Very nice.
The shopping part of Gower Street, which was lovely. And I returned to Wales, and then after that I was a theatre nurse. Then I was an academic, so I taught nurses, and I was one of the first teachers to do Project 2000. That shows how long ago it was. Then I ended up working as part of the regulator for the Welsh National Board. I was the last director of the Welsh National Board. Then I had a job in a Quengo, which got was closed down, and then I became a civil servant, and that was just over 12 years ago. And I've been the chief nurse of the country in Wales since 2010. So it is just coming up to my 8-year anniversary as a chief nurse. So it's interesting looking back on a career about the things that you've done. Throughout my time, I spent a lot of time trying to develop myself to improve my knowledge base. So I've done further education that has continued as my jobs have changed. So I have a degree, a master's, a PhD. I'm a teacher. So I'm one of these classic lifelong learners because I love the idea of learning something new. And I have to say I've never regretted the decision. I absolutely love being a nurse. I have always loved being a nurse, and I love being the chief nurse of Wales. I'm really proud about what nurses and midwives do in my country, and it's a privilege to be in this position.
It's great to hear senior people we interview, they always talk about, first and foremost, they're a nurse. As opposed to whatever role they're in now, they still consider themselves a nurse. It's always lovely to hear. What does a chief nursing officer do? Lots I know, but just to give our subscribers an understanding of what the role encompasses.
So there is a chief nurse in each of the 4 UK countries, and I can honestly say each of our roles is different. So I can tell you about the Welsh chief nurse, of course, because that's the one that I fill. So the way that the health service is structured in Wales, the Welsh Government, which has devolved powers and has done for the last nearly 20 years, is the headquarters of the NHS in Wales. So as a civil servant, I work and advise the Welsh Government. I give professional advice to policy makers. I am the policy lead for maternity services, so I'm in charge, if you like, of making all policies to do with maternity, not just midwifery, but the whole service. I am the NHS nurse director because as the headquarters of the NHS in Wales, it means I have a performance management relationship with the NHS in Wales. And I am seen as an ambassador. I'm supposed to go out and talk about nursing and midwifery. in situations just like this, and I'm really pleased to do that. And back in 2009, I became an advisor to the World Health Organization, and it was really my desire to try to promote what is happening within my country at a much wider scale. So I took up a leadership development opportunity with the chief nurse that was then in the World Health Organization. And after my development opportunity ended, I continued to have a relationship. And next week, I'm actually going to a meeting of chief nursing officers from the European region of the WHO in Athens. So we will have government officials, head nurses from across 53 countries coming together to talk about shared professional challenges. And what's always interesting to me when I go and talk to chief nurses from other countries, we're all facing very similar challenges. Do we have enough staff? Do the staff that we have got the right skills? We've got ageing populations, a lot of us. Many of us are worried about how do you support our children to have the best start in life. So if I'm sitting down with a nurse from Estonia or from Iceland or from Israel, it really doesn't matter. We talk about what it is to be a professional nurse. What is it to look after our population, and how difficult it is sometimes, because austerity didn't just hit the UK, it hit many, many countries. And probably the thing that's challenged most of us around the world is not having enough health workers. The World Health Organization says that if countries don't invest in its health worker population, by 2030 we'll be something like 12.5 million short across the world. And what we're finding, because so many countries don't have enough staff in country, they start advertising, recruiting externally, and it has caused this great churn, this great health worker migration phenomenon across the world. You have to be ethical about international recruitment. You've got to make sure that you don't asset strip, particularly from very poor countries, by offering them sort of wages and so on that the country can't meet. But to be honest, it is the challenge that I talk about more than anything else, is how do we make sure we've got a workforce fit to meet the changing needs of our population? And it's tough for everybody. And we've got to make sure that what we don't end up doing is unethical things that will cause a tremendous amount of harm in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. So yes, so my job, I'm a civil servant, but I'm a nurse first, I would say. The way I always think about it is, there's myself and 5 nursing officers. What can 6 people do? Well, not a lot on our own. So what we have to do, we have to influence others. We have to build an evidence base and then make an argument about why we should adopt a particular approach. So a lot of my influencing obviously is with other policy people. It is to support the ministers in Wales. But I also have to work with lots of nurses within Wales to persuade them to act. So, excuse me, one of the big things that I believe in is that it is much better to work with people than instruct people to do things, because you're much more likely to get change brought about. So in Wales, we pride ourselves on the fact that we tend to do things in collaboration. We're a small country. There's only 3.1 million people living in the country. There are about 30,000 nurses and midwives working in country. So when I say let's get together and talk about things, I can get all the senior nurses in the room and I can say to them, so what are we going to do about this? This is a challenge for us as a collective leadership within Wales. How are we going to drive improvements in patient care? So when we've been developing policies, one of the things that we do is I will go to the people who are actually providing the care and say, so what do you think will work? What are the really important things that we need to think about as we shape our policies and create new services and new models of care? So I'm really pleased and proud of what we do in collaboration in Wales. So that's my job, is persuading people to do stuff, I suppose.
Influencing, I think there's probably a bit more to it than that. You talk about some of the the collaboration and the policies that come in. What are the sort of key things at the moment, or key topics that you're focused on as a team?
So I should be talking quite a lot about staffing levels, because as you heard me say, this is an international phenomenon, so I'll start there. but there are a few other things I will touch on as well. So the way we ended up with legislation around nurse staffing levels is quite an interesting one, because it wasn't actually in the programme for government for the politicians in the National Assembly. It was actually a private member's bill. So Wales is somewhat unusual in that because we've had a majority or minority Labour government since devolution, what they do is encourage other Assembly members to put forward for a ballot so that we have other pieces of legislation brought forward. Otherwise, you would tend to always have one party's priorities predominating. So Kirsty Williams, who was the head of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, had a private member's bill selected, and what she wanted to have was minimum staffing levels put into legislation. And it was agreed that this would be examined, and it went through the various processes of gathering evidence. And we ended up with the Nurse Staffing Levels Act that came into full force in April of this year. So although it had royal assent 2 years ago, it's only this year that it came into being. And it has two duties. The first says that in everything you do, the NHS must think about, does it have enough nurses to look after patients sensitively? So that's whether they're providing it or commissioning it or contracting it. It has a second duty which came into force in April, which said that you have to use a particular methodology to work out how many nurses you should have on your adult medical and surgical wards. So this methodology looks at using a particular tool, using professional judgment, and then looking to see what's happening to patients. So most of my time now is thinking about where is the evidence-based tools, how do we develop them, how do we test out and bring the NHS forward so that we can extend the law. So we're likely to extend the law probably into paediatric inpatient areas, possibly district nursing, mental health services in the coming years. Mm-hmm. So we have this national programme of work setting out really to make sure that we have the right number of staff with the right skill set to look after our patients. We've increased the training of nurses in Wales by 68% in the last 4 years. We have retained a bursary so that if somebody wants to come and train in Wales, they are able to have some support during their training. They don't have to pay any fees. And if they choose to have the bursary, we'll ensure that they're able to work in Wales, and we can ask them to commit to working there for 2 years. So at the end of training, there will be a job that will be within our health service. Mm-hmm. And we see this as really important because we have to do something about the shortages of workers. We're all suffering, and Wales is nowhere different to anywhere else in the world. But we're investing a huge amount of money and energy in doing that. Obviously, having somebody come on a full 3-year programme is one way of training to be a nurse, but we have other options too. You can do it part-time. You can be employed as a healthcare support worker and do the training on the side if you like, and spread the training a little bit longer. You can do work-based training. We do shortened programs, so if you already have a degree in a science subject, you can shorten it. If you've been working as a healthcare support worker for many, many years and got skills, you can shorten your training. So literally any combination of how to train somebody, we're investing in it because we strongly believe we should have the widest entry gate as possible to allow anybody who's got the aspiration to be a nurse to do that. Now, Wales is interesting. The Nurse Staffing Levels Act is unique in Europe. We were, in fact, I think, the first UK country to go all degree level. So we made a decision in 1999, and by 2004, all nurse training in Wales was at degree level. For midwives, it happened in 2003. So that means we've got 14 years now of having a graduate level workforce, and it's enabled us to increase the other things post-qualifying. So we invest heavily in advanced nurse practice. We have training for nurses who want to be clinical nurse specialists, advanced practitioners, prescribers, and in fact we're seeing far more nurse-led services now because we've developed the workforce for over so many years. So it's really quite exciting actually to see the potential of a workforce when it's been given the right knowledge and skills. They really blossom. You know, it's quite astounding to see it. If I talk about midwifery for a moment, we have my other sort of priority this year is to roll out a new maternity strategy for Wales. So I put an interesting challenge into the service and said the evidence suggests 45% of labours, a woman going into labour, should start as midwife-led. No docs involved at all. Now, we're nowhere near getting that, but as an aspiration, it's quite interesting to aim for that. So what we're now saying is every health board has a consultant midwife. We have midwife-led units, which are either standalone or alongside obstetric units. We've seen an increase in support for women to have choice about the type of birth they want to have. So it's really interesting for me to see how policy shaped around evidence can drive changes in the way that we behave within service. So come December, we'll be putting out a new strategy for maternity. It has in it, as I say, sort of particular requirements around staffing levels and so on. And I'm really pleased about how midwifery has really shaped itself in recent years. Wales has the only World Health Organization collaborating centre for midwifery development anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. It is dedicated to midwifery practice. The only other one in the world is in Chile. It had the first Royal College of Midwife Chair of Midwifery appointed in Cardiff University. And for the last 2 years, we've had the RCM Midwife of the Year, actually was in Wales. In fact, last year, just to show off even more, if that's okay.
By all means.
Very proud.
By all means.
We had the RCN Nurse of the Year, UK. We had the Helpers of the Year. We had the Healthcare Support Worker of the Year, and we had the Midwife of the Year, all working in Wales.
It's all down to the Chief Nursing Officer, that.
I can't take any credit for that. They're all amazing people. But it really does show, if you invest in folk, it's amazing what they can do. It's really marvellous.
It seems that just listening to you, it sounds like Wales had a long-term strategy.
Yes.
Investing in that training, 10, 12 years ago, and then it's been again and again, keep doing it, and now it's sort of starting to bear the fruits of the labour. I know when you talk about midwifery, there's a worldwide shortage of midwives. That's worldwide, apart from in Wales. But I know as far as Australia, they have broadcast all over the world that they don't have enough midwives, so to have a centre of excellence is a great pull.
It is.
Great learn as well. I know you get on the front line quite a bit as well. I know you actually go into the hospitals, and you were travelling around in the summer.
Yes.
What's the environment like for a frontline nurse at the moment? What sort of challenges do they face?
Well, as I said, for nurses, we do have shortages, so let's not kid ourselves. Being a nurse is a hugely rewarding job, but it is challenging. You are with people when they're very ill, when they're going through life crises, when they are vulnerable. So it can be very rewarding supporting people, but it is emotionally a tough job to do. Then if you have shortages within your team, there's added pressure, which is why I've been working for the last 8 years to try to do something about that, to make sure that we have a healthy workforce, that people feel when they come into work they are able to do the best job that they can, rather than worrying that they haven't been able to do everything because there's not enough staff on duty. So around Wales we are seeing some positives. Many areas are now having much better staffing levels, so they are feeling the difference. But I would be naive to think that it's wonderful everywhere, because it's not. Some teams are carrying vacancies, and it is tough. The demand was so much greater. Wales has quite an aged population. I think we have more over 85s per head of people aged 85 and over per head of population than anywhere else in the UK, which is wonderful, because that means people are living long and are choosing to retire to my beautiful country. But with that comes people living into old age with multiple chronic conditions, often with frailty, and we have great pockets of poverty and deprivation in our country, and that has a lot of challenges based with it. So last winter was tough. We had the beast from the east, snow, we had flu, we had all sorts of things. And I think if you went and talked to the staff, they would say, yeah, rewarding, but it's been tough. And hopefully our winter plans that we'll put in place for this coming winter will help mitigate it. But last year was extraordinary, the level of demand, and that's going to have its impact on staff, to be honest. From a midwifery point of view, we don't have great shortages. We do have people come and retire and so on, so there's always a bit of churn. But it's, I'm hoping that they would say to you that, yeah, we're seeing much more midwife-led care, much more choice and involvement in how we look after women through their birth experience. So I think it's slightly different stories for different bits of Wales.
Especially if we focus on, as you said, that the general nurse, if you like, or the nurses in the community. One thing that's been quite a topic that seems to come up is actually the health of the actual workforce.
Yes.
Great at caring for patients and what have you, and sometimes our nurses forget about themselves. Are you coming across that? Have you seen any sort of things around that?
I think the staff, they will stay on, they will commit to looking after their patients, sometimes to their personal detriment. We do definitely don't want that as a way of practice, but it would be remiss of me to sort of say that doesn't happen in Wales, because it certainly does. We are trying our best to make sure that people have a choice of the kind of work patterns they do. We're very keen on having flexibility so that you can work part-time or flexible hours or whatever. But some areas, it's particularly if folk have chosen to work long shifts, I do worry about that. It is difficult, particularly when we've got an aged workforce. Being an older person myself, I'm not entirely sure I could cope with 12-hour shifts on a busy ward. And we've got to think about that. What do you do with an older worker? They need to be able to downshift a gear. So some of our investment lately has been on retire and return. So when folk get to 55 and say, I'm going to take my pension now and leave, we're saying to them, well, why don't you come back and do something else and continue to work in some way to share. So we're not losing all the expertise from our system. I also look at some of the healthy lifestyle choices that people make, and Wales has an obesity problem, and some of the nurses I meet will say it's very difficult to eat healthily. When I've got these long shifts, I will grab a sandwich, I've got to look after the kids, I've got all these other things going on in my life, so actually going to the gym or making the right choices is challenging. And I think it's incumbent on us as policymakers to try to design a system that allows people to make the space to have the opportunity to do the lifestyle choice. I recently joined a gym myself.
Leading from the front, yep.
Yes. And it's tricky, actually. I work long hours. Okay, not on providing care, but I work long hours in the government. And I have to be a little disciplined about it, because it's very easy at the end of the day to think, no, I'll just put my feet up and watch TV. But you have to think about what's best for me, and I have to take responsibility for me. So I think more nurses know that they've got to think about that. We just have to make sure that we're as supportive as possible to allow them to make choices that they want to make about that.
Well, in regards to nursing, obviously we talk about hospitals a lot when we talk about nursing, but you're obviously Chief Nursing Officer of the community as well.
Yes.
And how do you see sort of that role changing? Because you talk about Wales and the community, there's a lot of people out, further out that maybe can't get access to GPs or get in very quickly, especially if it's an older population.
Yes, so Wales is interesting because it's very rural in parts. I always like to joke that there's 3.1 million people and over 7 million sheep. So that sort of gives you a sense of.
They could take over.
So we have sort of that challenge. So we put out a 10-year health and social care plan in June of this year, and the plan talks about we have to bring care closer to people's homes. We shouldn't be expecting them to think that hospital is the default position. We should be thinking about how do we help people to stay in their communities, what services can we put in the communities and locality hubs and so on. So we restructured our primary care services, and I'm not talking about GPs here, I'm talking about services in the community around primary care clusters. So there's 64 footprints around Wales, and we're investing a lot in making sure that they have resources to provide care to keep people out of hospital and closer to home. So for me, that means I've got to invest in my nursing workforce. So as one of the options for extending the Nurse Staffing Levels Act is district nursing. So last November we put out principles about what advice I can give to the NHS in Wales about how to shape district nursing teams. We've doubled the amount of district nursing training for this year and next year. or more than doubled in fact. And we're also piloting neighbourhood nursing approaches to look at various models of care, based a little bit on the Buzzsprout work that's going on in Holland, but applying it to how do we look after people in very rural areas, how do we look after them in the middle of the city, how do we actually do the differences.
Just for anyone who hasn't heard of the Buzzsprout method.
So Buzzsprout is a social movement in Holland where the service is predicated on highly trained, very experienced district nurses that look after the person. It's very intensive. It does everything for that person to get them back on their feet, to look after themselves, and then they step away. So this is all, I suppose, in some respects, going back to what district nursing used to be like many generations ago, where you do far more for the person, and it's predicated on a very highly trained and very experienced workforce. So the principles in Buzzsprout are also around small teams, so you get to know your population very well. So the staff themselves in Holland, they organise it. They have very low administrative costs because Holland has got one of the most expensive health systems in the world. So this was almost a counterbalance to the expense. And it is worth looking at to see sort of some of the principles. And there are neighbourhood nursing pilots in most parts of the UK that have taken some of the Buzzsprout principles and applied it to a particular setting. And we're trying out different ways of looking after people. Small teams, highly skilled. How do we look up end-of-life care? How do we actually mobilise services to keep people well? How do you deal with frailty? And we're hoping that will give us, along with an approach to increase our numbers of highly trained folk, a much better future look to see how we're going to look after patients outside of hospital. Hospitals are bad for our elderly population. We had a lot of engagement in the End Pyjama Paralysis campaign that some folk will have heard of. Brian Dolan and his team sort of said to us, look, if you're an elderly person, and you've only got 1,000 days left to live, where would you want to be living? Would you want to be living in a care home, in a hospital, or would you rather be outside enjoying life? And he came up with this campaign about putting patients in beds, getting them in pyjamas or their nighties, not allowing them to move around, actually deconditions them. So it means they lose muscle strength. So Wales actually had a really positive response to this, to get people up, dressed and moving, to stop deconditioning. They say if you stay in bed as an elderly person for 10 days, you'll lose 10 years of muscle strength. Now that's phenomenal. It means people fall over, they get pressure ulcers, they end up in institutionalised care rather than going home. So what we need to do is apply that evidence to say, actually, we should try to keep people out of hospital so they don't end up deconditioned in our institutions. So getting people who've had to go to hospital up and out as fast as possible is also good for them. So there's a lot of evidence-based practice that we're trying to introduce into the models that we want our nurses and physios and OTs and all the rest of it to apply to.
It sounds like you're really using that sort of big data, something to investigate, do it all on fact and do it all on hard evidence to then go, right, this is the services we need. And it also sounds like you're talking about that Buzzsprout method, very patient care centred, and you're talking about it's about the patient. So
we have a set of principles that we introduced back in 2015 called the Prudent Healthcare Principles. And Mark Drakeford, when he was the health minister, he was a great proponent of this, and my current Cabinet Secretary for Health has endorsed it as this is the way we should be thinking about things. And this says you should create through co-production, whether it's a service or a relationship with a patient. You should do things with people, not to people. You should treat those with the greatest need first. You should reduce variation, do no harm, use evidence-based care, and don't overdo it. So only do what's necessary and no more. What we were finding is stories of patients who particularly elderly patients, who may have a chest infection, they'll end up in hospital, and then they'll start saying, oh, well, you've got a bit of arthritis and you've got your blood pressure, and before we know it, they start doing lots of other things. They stay in hospital longer and longer and longer, and deconditioning then means they often don't go home, they'll end up in a care home or worse. So the prudent principles are based on an international movement about doing less medicine. So only doing what is necessary and getting people support to make proper choices for themselves about their care. And that's one of the things that runs through lots and lots of our policies is that. So maternity services I talked about earlier, you're going to be a vision for prudent maternity services. It is about choice for people using our services, but it's also about working with them to develop what they want to see, what you want as an outcome.
Sounds like listening to you, looking to improve the patient experience, but also at the same time look at the cost, which is kind of usually the different way around, isn't it?
Yes.
But it's interesting listening to it. And I know you do some work on the NMC Council as well. You're part of that group as another one of your many areas of work to cover.
I personally don't sort of have a tremendously active role with the Nursing and Midwifery Council. But I'm very keen to work alongside our regulator is that we have regulation that is permissive enough for allow us to develop exciting and new roles, but also protects the public at the end of the day. So my meeting yesterday was with Sue Killen, who is the acting chief exec of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and I was talking to her about the difference in health policies within countries. Devolution is driving difference from a political perspective, and it rolls out into the way we deliver services in country. But obviously we want to make sure that nurses and midwives are able to move around the UK, that their practice is predicated on strong codes of proper ethical behaviour, and that they know what is professionally right to do so. The CNOs meet on a regular basis, and one of the pieces of work we've done collaboratively to try to support nurses and midwives working in Wales, a report has been created that talks about, so what is it to be a professional nurse or a midwife? How do you have difficult conversations? How do you make sure that the folk that you're working with, do you have a conversation with them if they're doing things you think are not professional? So there are some videos, they're on the NMC website, but this was actually a piece of work that the CNOs created when we come together to talk about, so what is it, what can we do to raise professional profile in the UK. So please, for those people watching this interview, have a little look on the NMC's website. There are some podcasts there, there's some literature there, and there's also some nice little videos which show what it is to enact a professional behaviour.
No, that's really good coaching. I think talking of videos and websites and podcasts and what have you, we'd love to hear a bit more about the This Is Wales campaign.
Okay, as you heard me say, for many years I've been worried about the workforce. So it's not just shortages of nurses that we have, we also have shortages of some of our doctors. So a few years back we decided to create a This Is Wales Train, Work, Live campaign. And it started off with trying to promote Wales as a destination for GPs, but we then sort of expanded it to cover nurses as well. And now it is, we're thinking of rolling it out for allied health professionals and pharmacists and so on. So if you're interested, please Google This Is Wales Train, Work, Live. There's some fantastic videos that show what it's like to live and work in the Principality. We have quite a low cost of living, so you can actually have quite a decent quality of life. We have quite an outdoors ethos, so there are lots of interesting outside pursuits that people get involved in. And when you see the videos and the posters and so on, it shows the balance, the work-life balance. So you can see, you've heard me talk about what it's like to work in our health service. We're highly invested in supporting and developing our workforce, but we want them to have vibrant lives in Wales as well. Mm-hmm. So we have some of the best beaches in the world. I think Barafundle Bay down in Pembroke is one of the top 10.
Yes, always in the top 10, that one. Yep.
I was telling you before the video camera turned on, I'm from the Gower Peninsula, and the Gower, which is west of Swansea, was the first place in the UK that was bought by the National Trust back in the 1950s because it's an area of outstanding natural beauty. So it means when I go home to visit my mother, who still lives on the peninsula, it hasn't changed in all my life. Now you think of how many places in the world you can actually say
Very few.
it is as my childhood. It's full of beaches and moorland, and it is a stunningly wonderful place. But from there, I would say that. But I would say that Wales has a huge amount to offer people. It is a great place to be. If you go and talk to folk working in Wales, they'll tell you it's a really great place to live and work. Great schools, great physical environment. I've worked outside of Wales and I went back. In fact, I wouldn't choose to work and live anywhere else. I love and very proud of my little country and what it's trying to do for its population.
Well, it's doing some great things. And just sort of to wrap it up really, how do you sort of see the future of nursing looking like in Wales? I know we mentioned the staffing levels, but obviously we've got technology coming in, there's different types of roles we think maybe be in. What would you sort of your 3 observations maybe might be?
I would say that we're starting to reap some of the benefits of investment. I will see more and more nurse-led services, midwife-led services. I think as technology enables us, we're going to be able to use far more gadgets and gizmos to enhance the way that we deliver services. But more importantly, that will help people make choices, because what we want to have is people to be able to look after themselves. The citizen has rights and responsibilities too, so they need to have the wherewithal to look after themselves, and rather than just rely on the health service. So I'm going to see in the future more of this, more investment in developing the evidence base, more innovation, lots of money is going into looking at new ways of delivering care and trying to see and move to enable people to live well at home rather than thinking that the destination is going to be in some kind of institution at the end of their lives. And that's what I think we're going to see more of. And nurses and midwives have a huge part to play in that.
We agree on that one. Other than the Chief Nursing Officer and many of the other roles you do, what do you do outside of work, Jean? What do you do in any spare time you may get?
So, well, I try to have a work-life balance too.
Good.
So I think I said to you, I have joined the gym recently, so I do try to go swimming and that sort of thing to keep well, keep balanced. But my other passion, this sounds really silly saying this now, but I do hand embroidery.
Okay.
So I have been to the Royal School of Needlework to do proper training because I wanted to learn this ancient craft of creating beautiful artwork by using needlepoint. So I recently gave an embroidery to the Royal College of Nursing, which is hanging in the headquarters in Cardiff. I know, a mad thing to do. I was challenged to do it over a glass of wine, and you know what it's like.
Dangerous.
So I find it's a mindfulness thing as far as I'm concerned. I have to let all the worries go and concentrate on the piece of art that I'm creating, and that's very good for my soul. And I think we should think of our bodies as both the physical and the well-being, the mental. And for me, the embroidery does it for me.
Makes it all go away.
Yes, indeed.
Jean, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all our nurses, healthcare professionals and doctors out there for looking after us all. And thank you for visiting the Voice of Nursing. We'll catch up with you soon.